Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, we discuss my thoughts on episode 4 of the anime series Violet Evergarden. And let me get it out of the way right away and say that once again, my viewing experience of this episode was somewhat dingy. That is to say, the animation. It did not hold the same crispness as the third episode did. Now, if you've been following my coverage of this particular series, the first two episodes were very, poorly shown, as if trying to watch through a muddied lens, faded glass or something like that. Very smoky. There was a filtering over it, and it was made that much more so, probably because something got lost in translation, in applying, the subtitles to the episode and saving the file and then streaming it or whatever like that. I don't know exactly. But the third episode came around and it had added to it the OP and ED, which were omitted from, the first two episodes where I watched them. And suddenly it just looked that much more beautiful, that much crisper, that much brighter, that much more vibrant. For the most part, there were still filtered segments, indoor situations and scenarios and stuff like that where the lighting was very dim and it looked overly filtered, I would dare to say dingy in places, but it looked that much smarter and that much more vibrant and colorful in the very well lit portions of the previous episode 3. So this episode comes along and it does contain the OP and ED, but it is once again like the first two episodes were very muddied, very overly filtered, very overly made to look dingy. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's how it's, supposed to look. All told, that filter is there for, some sense of nostalgia, as I, had speculated, for lack of making the entire series sepia tone. They want it to be colorful and everything like that, but it's just not as popping and vibrant as it probably ought to be, at least where I watched it. Now, I'm going to try not to bring this point up every time I talk about this show because it's 4 videos. I don't even know if I had mentioned it in my episode 1, first impressions video, but I did speak at length about it in my second episode discussion video, and I touched upon it again a little bit in my episode 3 discussion video because episode 3 looked spit and polished, looked beautiful and vibrant and very crisp and colorful and just popping, whereas the first 2 episodes did not. This episode, once again, not so much. You could see the potential there. The details in the brickwork of the outdoor settings of the buildings and the indoor settings are that much dimmer, but even the outdoor settings, the brightness of the sunlight and everything, it did not carry, it was not as popping and vibrant as those similar kind of sequences were in episode 3 in this episode. It was still very dingy, and it's not to a point that it was hard to watch. It's not something that I was just sort of aware of it, but it didn't get in the way of my enjoyment of the episode. And the episode on whole, the sort of story, if you will, I felt it got a little teensy bit wonky toward the end of it, but it was somewhat compelling to me. Once again, a secondary character, a background character to the titular Violet, is actually a bit more interesting than Violet herself, at least to me, with Iris, being summoned back to her hometown under false premises, with her mother using her grandmother's, original name and basically wanting to lure her daughter back to their hometown because she knows she's not living this high life as highly and haughty-taughty as she's making it out to be in her letters home and everything like that. And, her daughter is a young woman now. She wants to marry her off and set her up for her, a bountiful future and everything. Have her settle down, have a family, make ends meet and all that kind of stuff. And so the conflict that is born out of that, I found highly relatable, not with my own parents when they were still alive. My own parents were very supportive and weren't so sort of manipulative or anything like that as her mother kind of sort of was. the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they say. And her mother, she's coming from a place of, love and compassion and worry as a parental figure. She wants the best for her daughter. She's getting on in years, and she doesn't want her daughter to miss opportunities and things like that, and wants to see her settle down and have a happy family life like she had for herself. And there's a lot to be said about the conflict between parents and their children. The parents, more often than not have an idealistic view, an idea of what they want for their children, which may not coincide with what their children want. So that's very much the case in this case. And but I highly related with one of my grandmothers who was very much this way. She was very manipulative. She was very, she would pout if she didn't get her way, if you didn't do things conforming to how she wanted you to do them. And, it wasn't until later in life that she sort of eased up and became more respectful of things that I and, say, my sister wanted to do for ourselves. But there was still always an underriding manipulative thing like that, where, she would lure you in under false pretenses, much as Iris's mother does, to lure her back home and just, push her buttons, not out of maliciousness, but out of obtuseness, out of a lack of communication. And that's a large part of what the fallout was of this episode. It was resultant in the fact that Iris was so embarrassed, having been turned down by this guy that she really genuinely thought she was in love with, and he could only see her as a, tried and true friend and all this kind of stuff. And, so the embarrassment of that, the lack of communication between she and her parents, specifically her mother, of course the mother's not going to have any awareness of it. So when it comes time to lure her home and want to throw her a big celebratory birthday bash, but also, use that as a sort of proving ground to have her meet and try to hook up with potential suitors and potential husbands in the future. It was really like irksome to me to see what her mother was doing, because I've been the recipient of that kind of behavior myself with my grandmother, as I say. But at the same time, I'm looking at Iris herself, and it's like I know I can relate to what she went through, being turned down and being upset by that, feeling a lack of self-worth, feeling embarrassment, not wanting to necessarily reveal that to anybody for a fear of showing weakness or being less than savory to someone else or whatever like that. Whatever goes on in the machinations, the percolations of the mind when it comes to self-consciousness and anxiety. And I could highly relate to that aspect of it, but at the same time, it's been a long-standing evolutionary aspect to my own life and living that I want to be as honest as possible with whomever possible. In most estimations, I want to, if I'm feeling something, I want to reveal what that is. Sometimes I do tiptoe through the tulips. Sometimes I tiptoe on eggshells and mince words, and I don't just come out and say it, but I try my damnedest to put it out there in some level, on some level, to make that awareness, to let the other party know how I'm feeling, whomever that might be. And sometimes I guide myself or rather guard myself, keep myself guarded and dial it back, and sometimes there is hesitation. Sometimes I don't get around to it for a while. But the end game plan is to always let the other person know whatever it is I'm feeling, whatever conflict I'm feeling, whatever exuberance I'm feeling, whatever joy, whatever sadness, whatever rage or anger, frustration, anxiety, all these things. I want to be able to communicate that as much and as often as possible. And so some part of me was kind of perturbed with Iris as well, like the way she blows up, explodes, and runs out of the party. It reminded me of the old song, it's my party, I'll cry if I want to. And that's very much what she does. She storms off, she stays by herself. Now, in the middle of all of this, we have the titular Violet, still really in the early going of any sort of understanding or comprehending emotions and feelings and humanity and everything like that. I mean, they keep sort of tipping their hat to, well, is she really a doll? Is she a machine? Is she a human who's just been in the armed forces all her life? She's been a warrior, a weapon. She doesn't understand. Is it that she doesn't understand and she has to learn, or that she can't understand? And I feel like where I say it was kind of wonky toward the end is like, Iris is kind of giving her a verbal pat on the back when everything's been said and done, and she's had Violet write her a letter of apology to her parents and subsequently to everyone else. But we focus on the letter to her parents, and, Violet is concerned whether or not she was able to effectively emote what Iris meant to say to them, and whether or not that was actually impactful to them, whether that had any resonating, permeating sort of emotions for them or awareness for them. And of course, Iris says it was a fine letter. It was good. It did what it was supposed to do, that kind of thing. But it's, even Iris herself says, stop talking like a machine. Stop, and in that moment, like, it's the second time in the episode where they kind of said something along those lines. And I'm just thinking, is she a frickin' machine? Is she a robot? Or is she just socially inept? Is she just obtuse for a lack of learning and experiencing? And it will be something that she evolves toward along this journey, I don't know. There was a point where, in the middle of the episode, when they're sending the initial invitations to the party, and Iris's father went one way, Violet went the other way, and they meet toward the middle of these fields just before a mountain range or whatever it is, and Violet, in equating how she's feeling in that moment, says, like, for a lack of their being able to give her any fancy grub, any fancy schmancy dinner or anything really fulfilling, she says, well, it's just kind of like the beauty of this place. This is a pretty spectacular view. I couldn't have gotten anywhere else, kind of thing. And so it did raise my eyebrows, as well as my hopes that she is perceptive. She is gaining awareness to what human emotions are, to thoughts and feelings, and how we perceive beautiful vistas and things. And this is an extension of her hopefully becoming more and more in touch with emotions and all those things internally. She is certainly feeling the confusion and the conflict when we call back on the Major's saying, I love you, in what were probably his dying moments. And trying to understand that. And there is some level of relatability between she and Iris for that. Even though Iris still by the end, talks about how Violet was an enigma as soon as they met, and she remained an enigma as far as, and as long as she knew her. And I don't know what that means necessarily, if that means that maybe Violet never quite gets to where I want to see her get to, where she does understand, she is experiencing, and she is learning, and she comes to certain realizations as she experiences emotions and sees others, witnesses others, and interacts with others who are as well. But it remains to be seen, I want to believe that is the point of this. But thus far, the first two episodes were kind of setting everything up, setting the surroundings, giving us the backstory on Violet. And we got a little bit of a flashback toward the end of this episode, coinciding with the revelation where Iris's name came from, which reminded me of the Van Gogh painting, which is one of my favorites of his, the Field of Irises. But we also got the awareness of how the Major had given Violet her name based on a flower just as well. And, how beautiful and how heartwarming, whatever. It's sort of melodramatic, that. But, the first two episodes are really setting up the backdrop, the environment. The third episode is really sort of the first proper episode, I felt, and it was leaps and bounds ahead of the first and second episodes for the story, the characterization, the depth, the emotion. And none of it had to do with Violet. Violet was kind of a sideline to that, She was incidental to that. And it kind of felt like a similar framework in this episode. She was mostly sidelined. She was mostly incidental. She was much more active, I felt, in this episode. But still, Iris was more the focused character. Iris and her backstory and her family and her emotions and everything like that. And I can only hope, fingers crossed, and assume that it's all meant to be experiences that Violet can witness, which will inform her future, rounding about to understanding her own internal conflict, her own internal emotions and thoughts and humanity. And I just, for the moment, it remains to be seen, if that's going to be the case. But all of that said, to get it all down into a nutshell, I really did enjoy this episode for the most part. I did feel it was wonky in places, toward the end especially. Mostly because I'm not getting the overly resonating idea that this is for a rhyme or reason, as it revolves around Violet as a character. She just felt incidental to me. She didn't really feel like she accomplished anything to me or became aware of anything to me. They're trying to put that across in the end. I just didn't feel like it sank home for me. Much more the meat and potatoes of this episode was what was going on with the Iris character. So we'll have to see as we get on into the series, as it continues episode by episode. The next episode, whether or not she comes more into the focus as the titular character, or whether the sideline characters are going to remain so, and whenever the turnover is going to happen where she finally actually comes in to the limelight that much more, and we experience things with her, and we actually have a legit, explicit awareness of what she's learning and how she's evolving and how she's growing. Thus far, we're 4 episodes in, and it doesn't feel like she's really moved an inch from where we found her. Maybe baby steps, maybe inch by inch, or millimeter by millimeter, but not nearly as much as I want for the moment. But I'm at least enjoying the other focused characters that have been in the focus in episodes 3 and 4 thus far. And I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 4 of Violet Evergarden. If you've seen it as well, love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below. Our POVs can certainly disagree. If you absolutely were wowed and just, enamored by this episode, let me know that in the comments below. If you completely hated it, if it was the worst episode, let me know that as well. If you're somewhere in the middle, which is kind of where I am, I'm on the fence, kind of straddling between good and bad. It was decent for the most part, but mostly just passably, and if you happen to fall sort of in the middle ground like I do, let me know that as well. And otherwise it'll be pretty much it for me on this. If this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.